This item here I picked specifically because of concerns we have in our village with the climate change that is happening. This summer, I put my fish net out and started harvesting the Arctic Cisco, which is probably the type of fish that was used to create this bag. Unfortunately, our climate is changing tremendously, and this year, every net that I pulled, I had fish that were sick in our net. We are seeing a condition called fish mold, which is causing abnormalities on the skins of our fish. They make them look very bad looking with a hairy type of mold that is kind of growing on it, so it looks really fuzzy, and nobody likes to even try to think about eating those fish. We believe it's because of the raising temperatures in our waters. I measured the temperature on the Colville River at 70 degrees this year. It's been a number of years now that I have measured that temperature, and that is much too warm. Not only have I seen abnormalities on the skin, but I also are seeing tremendous amount of abnormalities on the inner parts of the fish. I have seen tumors on the stomach, tumors in the egg sac, tumors in the muscle. I have seen a fish shaped like S, and all of these various abnormalities come from various reasons, but I believe it's related to the environmental change and the degradation of our environment with various contaminants. In the Arctic, we have a condition in which the atmosphere brings pollutions from all over the world to the Arctic, and it comes down in the cold with the snow and the rain, and it's bringing these contaminants into our lands and our waters and into our foods. We had a cord blood study that showed that some of our women have over 130 contaminants in their bodies already. And there are many chemicals that are not even being used in the Arctic, but because of the way of our environment, we are getting these things into where we live. So for me, these are very important issues. I have one of my nieces who is currently relearning the technique to save the skins to make them into tools. And I worry about whether or not she's going to continue this effort in the future because of the number of sick fish I have pulled from our net this year. Not only did we have that, but along the west side of us, further south, there were many areas where there were large fish die-offs. The temperatures were way too warm, so when the fish migrated up the river, the waters were too warm, they died before they even got to lay their eggs. These are very concerning times for us all. We've had a tremendous changes to our fishery. We have a lot of salmon now coming into our area. Before Shanae was born, I would put our fish nets out into the water, and we would be getting maybe 0 to 5 salmon in our net. Now, those fish are being very predatory to the broad whitefish, which is likely the type of fish that made this skin. And it is very concerning. I've had elders ask me, do we have a new type of fish? Because they're coming in very skinny. No, it's likely that the salmon are chasing them, which is causing them to lose weight, and they're not the broad, fat fish that we depend upon to feed our families. Because the broad whitefish has a high oil content. We live in the Arctic, it gets to be 40 below. We need that oil content in our foods to feed our families, to give us the energy to stay warm in our environment, to continue to function at those extreme temperatures. So our bodies require us to eat foods with those fat contents. But when I come down here in your tremendously hot weather, I only need 3 or 4 bites. And I'm fine with stuff because metabolism changes. In the Arctic, I metabolize a lot. I can eat a whole tray full of food. But down here, I just need a few bites. It's the difference on the demands of what our bodies require with the different environments that we live in. For me, this bag is important because it has been rejuvenated in my family. I have people who are making earrings and necklaces and pins out of fish skin. And so this is a very important thing. Some of our people had lost these techniques, and we had to work with many tribes to learn the technique back. When our elders were brought into boarding schools, they were children. So they didn't have that time to learn how to prepare these different items to allow us to sew and retain them for continued usage. And so this is a special item for me. I can see that there is a type of willow that is upriver from us that was probably used to dye the color of the leather that was used here. And I think that it's probably caribou that was used to make this. And this was made from the fish skin. I can tell that the person that was sewing this had skill, but probably was not the best seamstress. You can see on the lowest strand here, there were some changes in the way that the stitches were made. If my auntie, when she was teaching me how to sew, saw this, she would make me take it all apart and do it over. So I know that there are techniques that were used here. This person did not have the extended skill, but they do have good skill. Their spacing of their stitches are very fine and it's consistent, so they do have some skill in this process. I can see that they used leather as a string to do the closure, and that we would use the edges of the caribou skins to cut them into thin strips, and they would use for our binders, and that's what's been used here. It looks like this was made with the strings up here for sure sinew, but the strings down here seem to be more man-made, and so I think that the strings down here might have been after contact with the non-natives that came up, because you can see the difference in the color of the string here versus up here. This one is true sinew, whereas this may have been used as a decorative way to increase the look of the item, to give it some variety. There were always efforts to take geometric designs and utilize them to decorate, but it also was a way to make markings on items, so a person would see those markings and they would know that's from so-and-so's family. And that's how we would always know whose items were. Even if we had an item lost on the trail, they could always go back to who it belonged to. The person that made this worked really hard on it. They used different types of leather, as well as the way that they did their stitching to add some decoration to it. They tried to modify the way that their stitching was used to help with the design. So it's an interesting piece. I can see by the way these scales are, this reminds me of the broad whitefish. And so as soon as I see it, I believe it's something that was probably made near our area. The lower Yukon isn't specifically in my area, but we had a lot of trading that would go back and forth. So there's probably some items that were traded back and forth to allow this item to be made. That intertribal connection is very important, and it allows us to build our family ties, but share stories of our animals and the usage of our animals in these various areas, and to build the connections on the importance of why we still live in our communities, and making sure that we're working together to protect what's important for all of us in our areas. And so this one has one of those special items that I will pass along next.